It's a little bit of an older clip. It's a clip of somebody trying to put 10 commandments in classrooms and getting absolutely ripped to shreds by a Christian.
And I say this to you as a fellow Christian. Representative, I know you're a devout Christian, and so am I. This bill, to me, is not only unconstitutional, it's not only un-American, I think it is also deeply unchristian.
Yeah, I love everything about it. This dude just ripped her apart. And the sad thing about this is an older clip, and they're doing it again. So I want to talk about the bill and some other things related to the 10 Commandments bill. And to help us, I'm going to bring my wife in, Rose Morgan. She's going to help us understand. She is in her last semester of law school. She's like this close. We're so close to done. So anyway.
Hi, everyone.
So to start, let's just watch like a little bit more of this, and then we're going to take a look at a Hemant Mehta article about what's happening in the classrooms. Will that work?
And I say that because I believe this bill is idolatrous. I believe it is exclusionary, and I believe it is arrogant. And those three things, in my reading of the gospel, are diametrically opposed to the teachings of Jesus.
There is no, like, in my reading. That's just flatly what it says, like, no idolatry. This is a plain example of idolatry, right?
And I'm glad that he's calling it out. However, I still take issue with this. The main reason being that even though he's calling it out for being idolatrous and for being unconstitutional and all that, he's still using religious reasoning to justify his arguments. From my perspective, at the very least, you shouldn't be using religion on the Senate or House floor of any state or in the federal government. That's just not who our country is supposed to be. We're supposed to be a secular government, and so even calling it out is problematic if you're basing it on religious justifications.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And the problem with it ultimately is it's almost like a W to call it out on religious grounds, right? Except they just move the goalpost back more. It's not like you actually win anything. What you win is them screaming about it anyway and just more religious justification for laws passing or not passing.
Yeah, and ultimately what we want to do is move away from using religion as justification for laws in general, whether they're on our side or not. We don't want religion in government. That's the whole purpose of the Establishment Clause and what Thomas Jefferson described as the wall of separation between church and state.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I do love to hear him shred the person, though. It's just fantastic. And he's absolutely correct on all of his interpretations.
Matthew 6:5, when Jesus says, "Don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray publicly on street corners. When you pray, go into your room and shut the door."
Anyway, yeah, this woman just right over her head had no idea. So I want to go take a look at this article from Hemant Mehta. So the title of this article, it's on Friendly Atheist Substack. Louisiana is about to force the 10 Commandments in every classroom. A bill sponsored by Republican State Representative Dodie Horton would shove Christianity in students' faces. May 18th, 2024. Anything you want to mention before we read it?
No, let's go ahead and get into it.
All right, awesome. Quick interjection. This won't take long, I promise. I'd appreciate it if you watched to the end of the video, or at least a couple extra seconds, because YouTube bases its algorithm off of watch time. The more watch time a video has, the further the video will go. Also, take a look at my website, owenmorgan.com. I'm selling my book, Understanding Jehovah's Witnesses, 400 pages, and my second book, 100 Questions for Jehovah's Witnesses, which is about 80 pages. And you can find them both there on the website. Audio form, ebook form, whatever. It's about my experiences within the religion and the history of the religion generally. The 100 questions are intended to challenge a religious leader, so I'd appreciate it if you give it a read. Okay, back to the video. Louisiana is on the verge of becoming the first state to require public schools to post a copy of the 10 Commandments in every classroom. Again, okay, that clip I played earlier, that's old. That's like a year or more old. And here we are sitting, like, reading this all over again.
And really, they're not the first state to do this. Like, they're the first state in the past 50 years. But there was a time in the late 70s, early 80s where states were attempting to do this. One such case was in Kentucky. They attempted to pass they did enact a law that would require schools to display the 10 Commandments in every single classroom and every single building that each district used. And it was ultimately ruled unconstitutional in a case called Stone versus Graham. And
is that a state level Supreme Court ruling, or is it?
That's a federal level.
Okay.
So it was settled precedent in the same way that Roe versus Wade was settled precedent. Unfortunately, though, I worry that what's going on in the state here in Louisiana is going to end up being almost the next Dobbs. In the case of Stone versus Graham, the Supreme Court ruled that this kind of law was unconstitutional using something called the Lemon test. Do you want to pull up the link I sent you earlier?
Yeah. Let me see if I can find it here. This one?
Yes. So scroll down to the second paragraph. So in this case, or in the Lemon test, there were 3 different prongs that must be satisfied, 3 different aspects of the Lemon test. First, it must have a secular purpose, meaning that if it also happens to be religious in some way, that has to be secondary and incidental. Then the second prong, it must have a predominantly secular effect. So again, any benefit to religion would be secondary or incidental. And third, it must not foster what's called excessive entanglement. And that means potentially getting the government too far involved with religion such that it would violate the Establishment Clause and the clear separation that was intended by the Founding Fathers. With Stone versus Graham, the case from Kentucky, they ruled that that law was unconstitutional because of the first prong, that it must have a secular purpose. There was no secular purpose that could be found to establish any kind of justification for there to be 10 Commandments displays in public classrooms. It really is purely religious.
So what does the Lemon test apply to specifically? Is it just like any laws that might have a religious bent to them? Or?
And see, that's where I'm getting, because it doesn't apply to anything anymore. There was a case for a couple years ago that all of you might be familiar with. It was Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, where a football coach was praying on the 50-yard line after games. In that case, one of the things that the Supreme Court ruled was that the Lemon test was no longer applicable in any way, shape, or form. And so because of that, any case that was decided using the Lemon test is now potentially up for reinterpretation, to put it kindly. And that's where we get these types of bills. Stone versus Graham, because it was decided using the Lemon test, is now potentially at risk of being overruled using the history and tradition test that we saw in Dobbs and in every single case over the past couple years. What they're going to try to say is that the 10 Commandments are part of America's history and tradition. It's long embedded. They'll probably point to legislative prayer even too. And by doing that, they're going to overrule Stone versus Graham and allow this law to stand. At least that is their goal. I don't know for sure if that's going to happen, but knowing how they think and knowing kind of where things have been headed in the Supreme Court, that's kind of where I see this all happening.
Absolutely insane. I didn't realize that the Lemon test was overturned in Kennedy. That's actually a pretty big deal.
It's huge. And unfortunately, the vast majority of Establishment Clause cases have been decided using the Lemon test since the 1960s. So there's a lot up for potential reinterpretation, including prayer in schools.
Well, I guess we're going to have to see how it goes. And this is one of those tests, I guess, isn't it?
Yep, unfortunately. And I worry that Louisiana, because they're making such a stink about it right now, they're going to be the ones to bring this to the Supreme Court.
Quick interjection, this won't take long, I promise. I just want to say I'd appreciate it if you check my Patreon. owenmorgan.com/Patreon to find it. YouTube's algorithm goes up and down, so I can never predict where it's going to be. Having patrons gives me some level of stability. Okay, back to the video. Let's read this article here about the Louisiana bill. Louisiana's on the verge of becoming the first state to require public schools to post a copy of the Ten Commandments in every classroom, while the state Senate modified her bill to help it pass legal muster. Did he refer to the state as a her? Is that what this is?
I think that he referred to the representative who introduced the bill, Doty.
Oh, okay, that was weird for a second.
To be pedantic here, as all law students are required to be, Louisiana, again, is not the first state to have one of these bills. It's just the first state in about 50 years.
It says, the changes may not be enough to avoid potential lawsuits. HB 71, sponsored by Republican State Representative Doty Horton, initially said that the Ten Commandments shall be displayed on a poster or framed document that is at least 11 inches by 14 inches. The text of the Ten Commandments shall be the central focus of the poster or framed document and shall be printed in a large, easily readable font. Okay.
And what's interesting here is that this language is almost exactly word for word the language that was used in Kentucky, the same state that...
When was that case again?
That was the 1980s case, okay. Stone versus Graham, that led to the Supreme Court finding these types of laws unconstitutional. And
absolutely wild. Because
they're using that exact same language, that's what makes me think that they are attempting to get these types of bills back into play now that the lemon test is off the table.
Yeah, it's disturbing stuff. It says, I guess this is her, Louisiana State Representative Doty Horton. So if you wondered what a person named Doty Horton would look like, now you know. This is par for the course for Horton. A couple years ago, she proposed a Don't Say Gay bill that would have banned all discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity through 8th grade, while also prohibiting all K-12 teachers from even mentioning their own orientation or identity. It is nothing more than an attempt to erase the very existence of LGBTQ people. The bill, thankfully, didn't go anywhere yet. But these bills are, they're busting these puppies out like mad right now, unfortunately. This Ten Commandments bill, however, sailed through the State House on an 82-19 vote. Holy Christ. Ten Commandments bill was voted in 82-19 in the Senate. Oh, no, I'm sorry, the State House of Representatives. That's crazy. So I guess it has to go to the Senate now, is that right? And then...
Yeah, so the way it goes is now that it's passed the House, it'll go to the Senate, likely receive a committee hearing from the Senate, then they'll vote on it, and unfortunately it'll likely pass.
You think?
I think so. I mean, it's Louisiana. I have about as much hope for Louisiana as I do Texas or Florida, which really should not be surprising, but yeah, so then it'll go to the governor's desk to be signed into law, and it kind of is up in the air as to whether the governor will veto it. That's one we'll have to wait and see on.
Absolutely fascinating. Who is the governor of Louisiana? Let's see. Who is the governor of Louisiana? Jeff Landry. Jeff Landry. What a wild name. Republican, of course. And I guess he's a brand new governor, apparently. Interesting.
And so because he's brand new, he may not be trying, he may not need to have any political gains, and so might be more likely to veto this given it's so unconstitutional on its face.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I guess we'll see. But, the bottom line is that these people, Christian nationalists specifically, are going to poke holes over and over and over again. It's like they say about assassination attempts. It seems a little bit out there, but you have to get it right all the time to protect from assassination attempts. But the assassins only have to get it once, right? These people can throw 60,000 bills across the country at the wall, and one or two may stick. But we have to get all of them to fail. That's, kind of part of the process. So,
and once one sticks, it becomes so much easier for other states to point to that first state and be like, Hey, look, they did it. We can.
It's because it's precedent now, right? If there's one added.
It's not precedent. Precedent only comes through courts, at higher courts. But what they will use it as is like kind of persuasion to get other state representatives or senators on board by saying, well, it can't be so bad. Look, Louisiana did it.
Makes sense. The version that made it through the state Senate, more on that in a second, passed 30-8 on Thursday, which was May 16th, 2024. While some Democrats voted for the bill, the no votes all came from their side.
Which is unsurprising considering Republicans are now the party of Christian nationalism.
Blows me away. Democrats voted for it at all. Like, what?
Oh, I mean, Democrats aren't all progressive. Unfortunately, a lot of Democrats these days are more like Reagan than they are like Bernie Sanders.
It's true, especially in red states.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly bad. It's no wonder those Democrats are against it. The bill even specifies the text that each Ten Commandments poster must display. Here it is. The Ten Commandments. I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Not for nothing, but that's the first commandment, and the first commandment contradicts the First Amendment. Just putting it out there. They're literally ordering a poster to be put on the walls in every classroom that contradicts the Constitution. It says, thou shalt not make to thyself any graven images. Isn't that funny? God, I love everything about it.
That definitely puts a lot of high school pottery classes in jeopardy.
Yeah, exactly. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. I love how they used what appears to be the King James version. Like, why did they pick that one?
Well, we all know King James is the right-wing Christian nationalist favorite.
Yeah, that's true. Honor thy father and thy mother. The Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill, shall not commit adultery, shall not steal, bear false witness, all that stuff. Shall not covet thy neighbor's house. Isn't that literally the basis for capitalism, our economic system? Coveting neighbors' things?
Well, I think in this case, what they're going to try to say is, well, you shouldn't covet your neighbor's house. Therefore, stop complaining about mortgage prices and stop complaining about interest rates.
It's like we sit here and point out all of the contradictions and hypocrisies and issues, and it just they don't care. It doesn't matter. The contradictions are there, and they know that they're there, and they just don't care. It's wild.
And the fact that it is so blatantly unconstitutional is the whole point. Like I said, my best guess is they're looking to overturn that case I mentioned, Stone versus Graham.
Yeah. More astute readers may have noticed that there are more than 10 commandments on that list. I did not notice that. Yeah, I am the Lord thy God did not seem like it belonged there, but I assumed it was before. All right, let's just read what he says here.
I guess that means you're not an astute.
I guess not. I'm not very astute. It says, if that's you, congratulations on having a better education than Dodie Horton. It's genuinely bizarre that the same people who don't want high schoolers learning about sex, systemic racism, or LGBTQ people seem to have very specific things they want kindergartners to know about adultery and their neighbors' maidservants, right? The list also wouldn't solve any real problems. Okay, now I have to know. Exodus 20. Okay. Just looking through the 10 commandments here. I'm the Lord your God, brought you out of Egypt, the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Number 1. Shall not make for yourself graven image. Number 2. Shall not misuse the name of so no blasphemy. 3. Keep the Sabbath. Number 4. Honor father and mother. Number 5. Shall not murder. Shall not commit adultery. Shall not steal. That's 8. Shall not give false testimony. That's 9. Shall not covet your neighbor's house or your neighbor's wife or male or female servant. There are so many contradictions in this. Okay, so what did she put? No other gods before me, graven images, blasphemy, the Sabbath, honor thy father and thy mother, thy Lord, thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill, shall not commit adultery, not steal. Therefore, I'm not seeing it. Is there something I'm missing? I mean, I guess she split, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant. Yeah, I think the problem is that she split this into 2 separate ones when it was originally just one. The list Also, wouldn't solve any real problems. No potential school shooter has ever plotted out a path of destruction only to reconsider after realizing the Ten Commandments say, "Thou shalt not kill." If students need a sign to remind them not to murder others, they have bigger issues. It would be great if they could see a mental health professional, but Louisiana lawmakers are currently considering another bill to get Christian chaplains in schools rather than hiring actual experts.
Which, interestingly enough, the chaplains in schools, that is one of my areas of interest when it comes to current legal trends.
Tell me about it. I
Well,
know very little.
so I actually sent you a spreadsheet. Let's go ahead and flip over to that and I'll kind of explain a little
All right,
bit.
let me see if I can pull it up 1 second here.
So, with the chaplains in public schools, this whole thing started in Texas, as many unfortunate things do. And their whole justification was that we don't have enough school counselors, we don't have enough people there to help students with mental health needs, academic needs. So instead of hiring school counselors who need at least a master's degree, oftentimes further certifications from the state and further training, let's go ahead and hire chaplains who need 40 hours of training online. And as you can see, since Texas passed their bill last June, almost a year now, there have been a bunch of other states, including Louisiana, who have at least attempted to enact something similar.
So a teacher has to have a master's degree, I believe, to teach in schools, and these guys don't need anything. And I believe that you were turned on to this subject, this project in the first place by one of your internships, and then you started diving in. Is that right or no?
I mean, I did most of this research just on my own. I read through all of the bills and I broke them down based on the different clauses or provisions inside of them. So, for example, if we go down to Louisiana,
Here.
yes. So in Louisiana, what we're looking at is local school officials, so likely principals or school district administrators, choosing whether or not to hire chaplains. And they can use state funds to hire chaplains directly, or they can choose to have chaplains volunteer. If you want to scroll over a little bit, they have no requirement for any kind of certification or licensing through the state, unlike school counselors. They are required to have a background check, but it's a very limited background check, and it's only related to certain offenders. It's not expansive enough to catch anyone who's been charged with abuse.
Absolutely wild. Sounds like a sweet gig, actually. The kind of gig that, like, any felon right out of prison could practically get, right? Almost.
And one of the things that's very interesting about Louisiana's in particular is the fact that within the bill itself, schools and school administrators are protected from liability. Oh, scroll back over a little bit more. There we go. They're protected from liability, meaning that they can't be easily sued for violating the Establishment Clause by hiring chaplains. And there are a few other states that have this provision, but not many. Louisiana is pretty extreme in that regard.
Absolutely wild. So what are the gray dots on this mean? Crisis and safety, mental health, suicide prevention?
And that just means those provisions don't exist in those specific bills.
Okay.
But you can see that there are a lot of them that are almost identical throughout every single state, such as the background check requirement. Now, Texas so far is the only one that's passed a bill like this, but the attempts are there. And while a lot of them have stalled in committee, meaning that they have basically just been put on the back burner, they haven't officially been killed. So the momentum isn't strong enough to just kill these entirely, which is a bit concerning, and it worries me for this next summer and the following summer and every other legislative session coming up.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. And I'm seeing here, just in case there's an audio audience listening and not actually viewing it, just kind of a breakdown. The spreadsheet will be in the description. Is that okay? Or maybe I can just take a screenshot of it or something. Mm-hmm. Or you just like watch the actual video on YouTube. But We've got Texas, Ohio, Florida, Nebraska, Alabama, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Maryland, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Pennsylvania, and Iowa. Iowa doesn't seem to have been filled out yet, but
Oh, Iowa, I didn't fill out more because this was originally for my personal use, and I watched the committee hearing on Iowa personally. So,
and as you said, it all looks very similar, like right down the line, background check requirements and certification or licensing requirements. It's all like, it's almost like they copy and pasted the bill and just changed one or two things. That's almost certainly what happened, right?
and if you look in one of the early columns, there's something I made note of. A lot of these bills use the exact same identical language of chaplains providing support services and programs to students. So when you take a look at this, like as Hemet Mehta pointed out, along with bills that would allow schools, or actually no, require schools to put the 10 Commandments up inside of classrooms, that shows a very, very disturbing pattern of no longer just attempting to kind of slide right in, for lack of a better term, kind of go under the radar. It's a very aggressive attack on multiple different fronts.
That makes sense. And I'm seeing here Indiana has an education requirement, but it seems to be the only one in this list that does. Master's degree in divinity, theology, religious studies, or a related field. 2 years of counseling experience. Fascinating.
And that more mirrors like federal requirements for military chaplains. But the big difference between military chaplains or hospital chaplains and what these states want to do with school chaplains is that the people who can receive chaplain services currently are people who wouldn't be able to access it anywhere else. In the military, you can't freely go to a house of worship. If you're in the hospital, same thing. If you're in prison, same thing. So that's why those services are provided, and they're not a violation of the Establishment Clause. Chaplains in schools don't have the same necessity, just like it's not needed to have the 10 Commandments inside of classrooms. They just want it because they want a theocracy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just got a super chat. Gaming with Nicholas says, I got to go. It's upsetting me too bad. But bear with me for a second, okay? I understand this is kind of upsetting. A lot of it is upsetting. But if you look at where we were in the year 1910, women couldn't vote. Black people drinking from blacks and whites only water fountains. And that continued on until 1920 when women gained the ability to vote, or 1919, I think. And that continued on until like the 1960 something, 64. And then we desegregated schools. I mean, it's a push and pull effort. The arc of justice bends. Wait, what is it? It was said originally by Martin Luther King Jr. and then by Obama. The
arc of history bends towards justice.
That's it. And I know that it doesn't feel like that all the time, but that's because we have to bend it that way, okay? If we weren't out here talking about this and raising awareness and finding ways to stop this, getting law degrees to fight these types of bills, this would happen. I mean, this stuff, they'd get their way. This would be pushed through with absolutely no pushback. That's why we have to talk about it. I don't want you guys to feel down about it because we have moved forward dramatically. Yes, we take 2 steps back, but we always take 3 more steps forward.
But if we all know about this, then we can all work together and be like Bender in Futurama, bending the unbendable girders.
Right, exactly. I was talking to Allison Gill at the American Atheist Convention recently. A lot of the stuff that I cover kind of gets people down sometimes. So I always give that talk, It will get better. It feels like it won't, but it will. It always does. We just have to keep forcing it to get better, right? And, Allison Gill had a talk at American Atheists about some of the problems. And I said that to her, it gets better. And she just shot me to over that. She was like, no, it's bad. I was like, okay, all right. Yeah, it is bad, but I promise it'll get better. Anyway, don't sweat the stuff that we're looking at. It's important that we're aware of it, but don't let it break you down, right?
Be like Bender.
Yes. Unbendable girders, exactly. Be like my tattoo, Unbreakable, or the comb, similar to the comb, Unbreakable combs.
Or if any of you are on TikTok and have seen Neil the Seal, be like the traffic cones that Neil the Seal is very obsessed with destroying and yet always pop back up.
And if you don't know Neil the Seal, then go find him.
Yes, please.
Anyway, okay. She tracked every state, the bills in every state, to see which ones have what and how many there are and everything. This is every single state in the United States that has a bill that's replacing school counselors with priests. Texas, Ohio, Florida, Nebraska, Alabama, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Maryland, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Pennsylvania, and Iowa. We're looking at June 2023, July 2023, December 23, January 2024, January 24 again, February 24, February 24, February 24 again, February, and then you got April 2024, and Iowa at the bottom here is January 2024. And she kind of compared and contrasted. This is like her project for law school. She's in her final semester, and this is the whole thing. This is her big project that she did to track all of this stuff. If you're interested in looking at the original spreadsheet, owenmorgan.com/chaplainbills. owenmorgan.com/chaplainbills. And I simplified it, cleaned it up, and put it in image form and passed it out to a bunch of big news, people that I'm in contact with. Hemant Mehta, the Friendly Atheist, the same person. Seth Andrews, Jimmy Snow, and I'm going to post it to Reddit. I'm going to post it to a bunch of other places. But if you want to see the cleaned up template or the image that I drew for it, actually, it's right here. This is the image that I created. I put cute little graphs in and stuff, and I put the bill numbers as the sources of the information. If you want to verify the information, there's no source listed, but, the bill numbers are the source. Just go to the bills and look it up yourself. But I put, her website at the bottom, owenmorgan.com/V Anderson. She doesn't have like a URL of her own right now, so she's using a LinkedIn account. But yeah, Rose Morgan's a pseudonym of hers because of the West Virginia people. So I think she's going to continue using Rose Morgan with my audience, more than likely. But on official professional documents and for the bar and for her legal career, she's going to use her real name, Victoria Anderson. Anyway, so school counselors replaced by chaplains. I kind of compiled this into a nice, neat little graphic that I passed out to news organizations and stuff. No education requirements and requires an education. Most of them have no education requirements. State certification not required, the majority, vast majority. No eligibility requirements. Sex offenders are ineligible or other. Sex offenders are ineligible is most, but second place is no eligibility requirements at all. They can be sex offenders if they want. And then third is other. I included other, but if you look at the source, which is right down here, owenmorgan.com/chaplainbills, you'll find that other includes people with felonies, certain misdemeanors, domestic abuse charges, and sex offenses and things. It's complicated. Parental consent not required. That makes up 83% of the bills in the United States that replace school counselors with preachers. Just think about that for a second. Parental consent. We care about parental consent. That's all we're trying to do. And suddenly, when it comes to something that they agree with, that they want to force down people's throats, religion, parental consent unnecessary. We're going to exclude it from our bill. Explicitly replaces counselors or not specified. Those are the only two options. There were none that said it does not replace school counselors. That was not specified was 83%. 17% said we explicitly replace them. No mandatory reporting requirements was in the minority, 8%. 92% did have mandatory reporting requirements, but 8% have no mandatory reporting requirements? What? It should be 0. Here's another little bit of the chart here that shows the dates when they were proposed. As of this immediate moment when this video released, one has passed in Texas. One has failed, I believe, and the others are in committee right now, by and large, enrolled or whatever. There's a whole bunch of stuff. They're all working on them right now. These are all of the states that, this was orchestrated for. And as you can see, almost all of them mirror each other. They copied each other. Protected from liability. Most said not specified. But a couple said, yes, they are protected from liability. So if a chaplain says something to a kid, being gay is evil and you should kill yourself, and the kid does it, he's protected from liability. Education requirement, none specified, none specified, none specified. No education requirements for any of these bills but one, and it's in Indiana. The one education requirement, master's degree in divinity, theology, religious studies, or related field, and 2 years of counseling experience. Certification requirement through the state, basically none of them, zero. Explicit no's, no, you do not have to certify through the state, are Texas, Ohio, Nebraska, Alabama, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Kansas, Louisiana, Pennsylvania, and Iowa. You do not need to certify. It just wasn't specified if you need to or not in Florida, Maryland, and Indiana. That is some shit. And this stuff is not being reported on because people didn't see this coming. They didn't realize that this is happening. My wife took this on as a project when she discovered one of the bills and looked into it heavily. This is all from my wife. You will not find this information anywhere else. OwenMorgan.com/V Anderson is her link if you want to learn more about the work that she does. Until we get a URL for her, she's going to have to use a pretty link under my URL. But anyway, wild stuff happening right now. Wild. Yeah, anyway, that's pretty fascinating. I see that you gave me this link to look at, and it's got cute little pink highlighting on it. So what is this exactly?
So this is the actual bill that was introduced in Louisiana to put up the 10 Commandments inside classrooms. And I wanted to use this as an opportunity to help all of you understand how to read bill proposals because it's hard. It took me a long time to figure out. And if I can help point you in the right direction using pretty pink highlighters, then that's all the more power you have. More like being Bender. Yeah. So the first highlight I have, this is where you get what everyone was referring to, like Hemet Meta, like HB 71. HB stands for House Bill. That means it was introduced in the House itself. And 71 just refers to like the specific number. That way you can easily recall it. You use the same numbers over and over throughout the years sometimes, but there are some that really stick in people's memory, like Texas SB6.
Yeah, or I think HB 666 famously was like a really big deal on the federal level a while back with QAnoners.
And then right underneath of that, these are all of the House representatives and even a couple state senators who have backed this bill, who want to see it pass.
It's a House bill, though. Why are senators signing on? Is it just to show their support?
Yeah, they're just sponsors. If they have sponsors in the Senate, that means that when it gets there, it'll be just a tad bit easier.
Okay.
And then underneath of that, where you see schools, requires the display of 10 commandments in schools. That's essentially just the broad abstract of the bill. So if you're going through bill tracking websites, or if you're looking at the state legislature's website to find this legislation, you see that and you can understand immediately kind of where they're going with this.
Okay, now regarding just as a layman, somebody who has very tangential knowledge of the law, bill tracking websites, are those like, what are those? Where do you find those? Do people create those and they just call into courthouses to find the bills and they create an API for it? Or is there a specific thing for it?
So there are some companies that have created their own proprietary software. There are a lot of free companies, though, that you can use to find these bills. My favorite is Legiscan, Legiscan. And from there, you can look at all sorts of different bills. Don't quote me on this, but I believe that website also shows you similar bills in other states. That way you can kind of get an idea of what some of the legislative trends are currently.
And does it ever miss bills, like, or is it just like an automatic thing? It automatically pulls the bills and enters them.
It automatically pulls the bills, but it doesn't have like, you can't set up an automatic filter in that same way you're describing. That's more the ones that you pay $20,000 for.
Right.
Just throwing out a number.
Right. Okay, I see. Interesting.
But if we scroll down, we see right here, just a little bit up. So you see section, that's what that little squiggly means. Section 2122, 10 Commandments displays. That is the name of the actual statute that's going into the statutory scheme of the state. So that means that if you were to look up, for fun, obviously, Louisiana's entire statutory scheme, and you want to define this section, you would go to section 2122. And then the 10 Commandments displays, that's just the title of what that subsection is. And it breaks it down through further subsections. So I went through and I read this, and it has a couple different subsections. You'll see the main ones being letters, A, B, and so on. And then underneath the letters, you have 1, 2, 3. Those are the subsections within the subsections. Because politicians and lawyers all love subsections. It's our thing.
Right. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we've got B1, 2, 3. Right. Is that what we're talking about? Okay.
And so if you're, it's really hard to read through this just on a screen. What I like to do if I'm trying to figure out what's going on is print it off and highlight where each subsection is. That way I understand where I'm at within the bill, because a lot of times the language and the way it's laid out is intentionally meant to mislead you.
Interesting.
And,
yeah, that makes sense. I can see people doing that.
Mm-hmm. And so within each subsection, I've kind of highlighted a couple provisions. So the first one, we were talking about the text of the 10 Commandments shall be the central focus of the poster. So that means that it has to be on display right in the center. They can't just put it in white font in the footers. Yeah, I'm not saying I've ever done that, but you know.
Right.
And then one thing I found interesting within this, the nature of the display shall be determined by each governing authority. That's just fancy language for exactly how it's displayed is up to the school districts and principals and the like, but it has to be on display.
Wow. And they also said in this bill how big it has to be, right? 11 inches by 14 inches, I guess.
Right. And that's right before my second highlight there. I didn't find that all that interesting. It's big, but it's not like it needs to be a mural, you know.
It's a little bit bigger than normal printer paper by a few inches on each side. Okay.
And then, you know, we went through and we read this is where that language that Hemet Meta like highlighted within his article. It's in subsection A2. The text shall read as follows.
The 10 Commandments, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt have no other gods before me, so on and so forth. Interesting. Okay. Wow. I wonder where Hemet Meta got this. Do you think that he went through the bill? He was a math teacher at one point. Maybe he has somebody who helps read through bills for him.
Yeah, and these bills and every single bill that's introduced are all available on the state legislature's website, so you can access them too. You don't need any special law software.
Interesting.
And so then we look through, and one other thing I wanted to highlight for everyone, if they're interested in learning how to read bills and how they apply in the future, is subsection A4. The State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education shall adopt rules and regulations. That basically means that they're not going to be going in and specifying exactly how all of this needs to be implemented right now. They're authorizing an executive agency within the governor's jurisdiction to figure out how to fully implement it. They just are saying it needs to be implemented.
I'm wondering if they could put the framed document, quote unquote, on the ceiling. Is that something they could do?
I think that would probably not be okay. That would be going against the spirit of the bill if it were to pass.
But the letter of the bill?
I know where you're going. I would love it, but
you got to put stuff in there to protect against people messing with things.
The language says clearly displayed, so
Okay.
I think that clearly displayed, it doesn't count.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before we move on?
Just one thing I wanted to point out, that this last highlight, that this is one of the reasons why I find it so useful to print it out and highlight it myself. A lot of times when you're reading these bills, they'll reference themselves. So in this case, subsection B2 is going back to the text shall read as follows in the whole 10 Commandments, but they're not spelling it out for you. So what I like to do is highlight it and then kind of draw an arrow back. And using some of these tactics, if you wanted, you could read through the legislation yourself and start learning how your state in particular likes to word things, how it likes to implement things. That way you can help be a bender.
I imagine that there are probably think tanks, like conservative think tanks, that probably write these bills up a lot of the time and give them to senators, right? And
absolutely. Members. It's called model legislation. And so they do all the hard work. And then people like Dodie just need to submit it, just send it on through. They don't actually need to really understand what's inside of it. But if we want to fight it, we need to understand what's inside.
Absolutely wild. Well, I appreciate you giving us some insight into this whole world. It's disturbing how this is being kind of railroaded through, but like we said earlier,
the arc of history bends towards justice.
Right. The moral arc of history bends toward justice. That's what it is. Just keep fighting and stay informed on this stuff more than anything. People make a joke out of awareness, but awareness is very, very important. Look at what happened in the 60s and 70s with the Vietnam protests, people protesting the Vietnam War. It was in songs, and it was on college campuses, and it was everywhere. That was nothing more than awareness being brought to the fact that it was like a bad war, basically. Awareness is one of our most valuable weapons in this war against extremist nutcases, I think, right?
And once you become aware, check your state's committees. Keep an eye on them, because a lot of time legislation like this, for example, will be heard in committees. And there's time for you to go to the committee meeting or submit your own thoughts about what's going on, and telling your senators or your state representatives directly what you think about this. Because even if that doesn't change the ultimate outcome, it becomes part of the history. People can point to it and say, look, this was not popular. Why are we upholding this? Or best case scenario, like what we saw with Iowa's chaplain bill, so many people testified against it that they didn't move forward with it. You can be real change.
Yeah, and if you can't, somebody else listening might. That's why we need to talk about this stuff. So don't let it get you down. Do your best and don't worry about the rest. That is my motto for the entire world. It's like my Hakuna Matata, if you will, It's
what he tells me every time finals come around.
Yep. Doesn't matter if you it doesn't matter if you get a 0. What matters is that you did your best. That's it. Right? Anyway, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this stuff. Super interesting.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Ophelia Kami, you should send that to the Majority Report. Yeah, that sounds interesting. Maybe we could send it to them.
That's a high compliment. I don't think they would be all that interested in hearing from a third-year law student, but I appreciate it.
I don't know about that. They hear from all kinds of people. Additionally, I have I've communicated with them before,
Well, I'm just taking it as a compliment. It seemed like you really got a lot out of that, and that was my whole goal. Also, just to show off a spreadsheet that I made for one of my classes, because no one else is going to really see it. So
Absolutely.